Okay, hello and welcome everyone. So in this video, I'm doing a walkthrough of some practice past exam questions relevant for the final exam, cumulative final exam in Principles of Microeconomics course. Now, specifically for this term, the actual exam be somewhere between the range of like 25 to 30 questions or so. You see here, I've got 40. Part of that is because I want to use past exam questions. It turns out this past exam is a little bit more heavily weighted on the earlier stuff than what I'm going to do for the semester. Like I said, what we want to expect for the final exam is about 60% of the questions are going to come from what we've covered after exam 2, about 20% from exam 1, about 20% from exam 2. Right, so 20, 20, and 60 for our total of 100%. Right. Problem is, the past exam that I was drawing from didn't kind of have that same proportion. And so I wanted to add in some additional questions, bringing us up to, well, in this case, 40, to kind of reflect a little bit more from the more recent content. So anyway, that's the reason why this is 40 instead of 30 or even 25. But again, the actual exam for this semester, probably in the future, I'll have, I don't know, I like the 40 question final exam actually for in-person type, but there's just so many things that can go wrong with the Canvas-based exam, and so I would rather have like kind of the minimum necessary amount of questions for me to be able to adequately assess, and I think that's 25. All right, so anyway, what I want to do is I'll go over each of the questions kind of in turn, but the first thing I want to do is kind of flip through so you have all the questions, just in case for whatever reason you haven't got the exam file, right? So I just got to do this so it's in the video. I'm going to go kind of through slowly. I guess you could stop the video and look at the questions or whatever. I realized I had the solutions on the first page, but probably not everybody was able to memorize that real quick. All 40. All right. Oh, that one got cut off, so, but that's okay. All right, so here, 18 to 22. Good. And then what I'll do is I'll switch over, and the one that I'll actually talk from, I'll highlight the correct answer in the video or on the screen. It's already highlighted. I'll depict on the screen the highlighted or the bolded version rather than having to flip back and forth to the answer key, right? So anyway, so like what I think you ought to do is kind of go through the questions. If you haven't already, right, go through the questions, answer them to the best of your abilities. Next thing I would do is anyone that you get stuck on or are not sure about, I would go back over the notes, go back over the reading, Stevenson Wolfer's reading. This goes up, there's not 41. It's kind of a pain to keep the same numbering system in Word. And so I always had it set up to add one more if I needed to add one more question. Anyway, so that's not important. Here's the important part. All right, so I'll go over each one. So question 1, shifts in demand. What's true of shifts in demand? Shifts in demand will lead to price and quantity moving in the same direction, right? You could think of a demand curve shifting along a stationary supply curve, and you'll notice, well, if we get an increase in demand, we'll get an increase in price, increase in quantity. If we get a decrease in demand, we'll get a decrease in price, decrease in quantity. Does not always lead to an increase in equilibrium price because we haven't said the direction of the shift. Doesn't always lead to an increase in equilibrium quantity. Same reason. And does not lead to price and quantity move in opposite directions. That is a shift of the supply curve. That'll do that. The producer surplus on a unit sold equals actually price minus cost. Now, you might get tripped up seeing price minus marginal cost multiplied by half or 1/2 price times quantity, something like this. Well, it wouldn't be... let's see. So not all of these are algebraically meaningful, but you might try to think of producer. So the definition of producer surplus is it's like it's the economic value that goes to sellers. Producer surplus, you almost want to think of it like profits. The difference between profits and producer surplus is that producer surplus won't capture fixed costs. And so if we had no fixed costs, then profit and producer surplus are the same. But anyway, so producer surplus graphically then is the area under the price and then above the supply curve or the cost curve in the case of whatever, maybe it's a monopoly or something like that. So you might want to think like, oh, producer surplus will be the area of like 1/2 base times height is the triangle. So good. Sometimes it'll look, depending on if there's a price control, it might look like the state of Nevada. We'd have a triangle and a rectangle. No, but none of that's relevant here, because this is just telling us the producer surplus on a unit sold. So like on one single unit, on an incremental unit, the producer surplus is going to come from, well, it's the difference between price and marginal cost. All right, percentage change in insulin demanded for any price is 0. Oh, that's really inelastic, right? I should finish the question though. The demand curve for insulin is, and the price elasticity of demand is, right? So elasticity doesn't measure if price causes a change in quantity. It measures how much, measures the magnitude, right? We already know by the law of demand, if price changes, quantity demanded is going to change. We even know the direction by the law of demand. What elasticity gives us is if price changes by some proportion, does the quantity change by a greater or lesser proportion, right? Okay, so here we're told the percentage change in insulin demanded is 0. It doesn't matter what the price change is. There's no change in quantity. For that to happen, think of the graph. It's got to be the spike. It's like a vertical spike at whatever is the quantity. So for any price, you have the same quantity. So the demand curve for insulin is vertical, and then the price elasticity demand is perfectly inelastic, right? So the percentage change in quantity would be 0 divided by whatever is the percentage change in price. 0 divided by anything is 0. And 0, the interpretation is that's perfectly inelastic. All right, so hiking on a hot day without water, they're willing to give up $6 for a bottle of water. When they do their grocery shopping, they're not willing to pay more than $3.60 for a case of 36 bottles of water. If they buy a case of 36 bottles for $3.60 or 10 cents per bottle, their consumers, I hit my space bar, sorry. Their consumer surplus is on the first bottle and then on the 36th bottle. Okay, so one of the things that's going on here is we have to recognize the fact that there's probably diminishing benefits as they consume more. Also, what we're told is for the first bottle, they're willing to pay $6. Okay, but they actually only had to pay 10 cents for that first one. And so that gives us kind of the clue, because there's our $5.90, right? 6 minus 10 cents is $5.90. And then is this part correct? Yeah, because on the 36th bottle, that's going to be, let's see, by the 36 cases by a case of 36 bottles, 10 cents per bottle, the 36th bottle will be valued at 10 cents. The price of each bottle was 10 cents. And so at the 36th bottle, that's where their consumer surplus is 0, right? So the idea is a lot of consumer surplus on the first one and then diminishing down to the point of 0. That's why we buy the case of 36 and not a case of 12 or 2 cases of 30, whatever. So anyway, so the consumer surplus is $5.90 on the first bottle and then 0 on the 36th bottle. That doesn't mean that you don't want the 36th bottle. It means that that's the point where you're exactly indifferent, right? This is like the rational rule for our consumer. Keep consuming as long as your benefit is at least as big as the price. And that qualifies. Their benefit is at least as big as the price. It's equal to the price, right? Okay. All right, so binge watching their favorite show on Netflix, attempting to decide how many more episodes to watch. They should continue watching episodes as long as the marginal benefit of another episode exceeds the marginal cost. Let's see, it's not the benefit is less than the marginal cost. That's bad. You should watch fewer then. The benefit of watching another episode is positive. That's not our criteria. The cost of watching another episode is positive. No. What the criteria for continuing watching episodes is we want the marginal, this is like rational rule for binge watching on Netflix, right? So continue watching episodes as long as the marginal benefit is at least as big as the marginal cost, right? Okay. So from a community perspective, the marginal cost that matters, community perspective. So we're thinking like society as a whole. The marginal cost that matters is the marginal social cost, right? It's not the marginal private cost. It's not the marginal external cost. I mean, that's part of it, but we really care about the marginal social cost. We don't have a marginal public cost. Marginal social cost is going to be the private cost plus the external cost. But from the community perspective, this is like an externalities question. From the community perspective, you're not ignoring the individual. you're considering their interests alongside everybody else's, the external cost, right? The problem with the externality is the individual ignores the marginal external cost. They pay attention to their marginal private cost. The marginal social cost is going to bring in, it's actually going to be both A and B together, is what gives us marginal social cost. Although, like, that's not a valid answer. It's just like kind of explain the concept behind it. The valid answer, the correct answer, is marginal social cost. All right, so can change the oil in 30 minutes, takes 45 minutes to change the oil in the same type of car. Which of the following is true? We can't say anything about comparative advantage, because in order to have comparative advantage, you have to have two people and then like two products. And so comparative advantage is going to give us, whoever has the comparative advantage has the lowest opportunity cost of producing whatever it is. Whoever has the absolute advantage is going to be the most efficient producer. Well, here we have two individuals, we have one task. And so we can't say anything about comparative advantage, because we'd have to have another task that the other individual is presumably whatever you could have. So you can have the absolute advantage. I was getting myself into trouble, because you can have the absolute advantage in both goods, but you can't have a comparative advantage in both goods. So we'd have to have the other character has to have comparative advantage in one of the two goods, unless their opportunity costs are exactly the same. So you can, let's see. So in terms of like the economic theory, you can have one person with comparative advantage to one good, one person with comparative advantage in the other good, or you could have both of them have the exact same opportunity cost, and then you don't have anyone with a comparative advantage. But you can't both have a comparative advantage. Okay, so but if you can change the oil in a particular car in 30 minutes, which is fewer than 45 minutes, you're the more efficient producer, and so that's absolute advantage. Right. When the lawn care services market is characterized by positive externalities. What's the problem with positive externalities? We get underproduction. Too many lawn care services are produced. No, that'd be true if there's a negative externality. Too few lawn care services are produced. That's right, because the lawn care services are like the primary activity that then generates private benefits and private costs, and then external benefits and external cost. And the idea here is, well, maybe the lawn care services market creates additional positive benefits to the rest of society. It could be like, having fewer weeds and insects and pests and rodents, or whatever is I don't know. So there's this additional benefit that's captured by neighbors and others, like passersby. And so the idea is, well, when there's positive externalities, we would want more lawn care services, but we don't get enough because the individual is only paying attention to their own benefit and their own cost. That's the problem of positive externality. There's another benefit that they're not fully capturing, and therefore we don't get the socially optimal level of production. A binding price floor leads to a surplus. So for binding price floor, I think of the minimum wage. So it's above the equilibrium, and it leads to, unemployment. And so unemployment is what the term we give to a surplus in the labor market. And so that's actually, that part's not controversial. So any binding price floor is going to lead to a surplus in the labor market. That's unemployment. So if the minimum wage is binding, that means that we're going to have a situation with unemployment. Like I've always said, I always say in lecture, is like that. So we have to go a little bit further if we're actually evaluating whether minimum wage or minimum wage increase is a good or bad idea. Ultimately, it's a case-by-case sort of regional story, because it kind of depends on some other additional factors. We can kind of get into trouble just running off with the Econ 101 model and saying, oh, hey, look, if we have a binding minimum wage and we raise it, we're going to create more unemployment, which is true, but there's some nuance there to actually kind of work through. But that's more for lecture than for a review anyway. So, or for the exam practice walkthrough. All right. So countries benefit from trade by importing goods in which their opportunity costs are relatively high, and exporting goods in which their opportunity costs are relatively low. Yeah. if your equilibrium price is below the world price, equilibrium price of that good is below the world price, then you have a comparative advantage and you ought to export, because you can find buyers abroad who are willing to pay more than domestic buyers. If the domestic price is above the world price, right, now you want to import because you can find foreign producers who are willing to sell at a lower price than domestic producers. Anyway, so countries benefit by importing goods in which their opportunity costs are relatively high, where their domestic price is above the world price, and exporting goods in which their opportunity costs are relatively low, where their domestic price is below the world price. All right, so when an employer makes decisions based on statistical discrimination, it is using observations about the average characteristics to make inferences about the individual. Decision about whether to work depends on the cost-benefit principle, and the decision about how many hours to work depends on the marginal principle. Whether to work, weigh the costs and benefits, and then how much. So you kind of incrementalize the decision. That's marginal principle. How do companies' accounting profit and economic profit compare in size? Accounting profit's larger than economic profit if there's implicit cost. Remember, accounting profit is going to ignore implicit costs, pay attention only to kind of what's on paper. Economic profit pays attention to implicit costs, opportunity costs, and so on and so forth. And more typically, implicit costs are going to be present, and so economic profit's typically going to be smaller than accounting profit. That's one of the stories for the perfect competition outcome of zero economic profit, right? And then zero economic profit in the long run is sort of like one of our long run outcome stories. Well, our conclusion is that there's zero economic profit, which means after taking consideration opportunity costs, there's no further profits. But there certainly can and will be accounting profit. And so that's an important distinction. Which of the following is correct about the discount effect facing companies in perfectly and imperfectly competitive markets? Discount effect, this is the idea of like when you increase output to be able to sell additional units, you have to lower the price actually on all units sold. Companies in a perfect competition situation face a horizontal demand curve, horizontal marginal revenue curve, horizontal at the equilibrium market price. And so each additional unit they sell is going to go for exactly that price. And so there's no discount effect for perfect competition. So they do not face a discount effect. What about an imperfect competition? Now you've got a downward sloping demand curve. So you got a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. And then, in order to sell an additional unit, you've got to lower the price, not just on that unit, but on all previous units, unless you're able to practice price discrimination. All right, in the long run, a company can remain profitable only if barriers to entry are present. Yeah. All right, so some of these are just kind of definitional. Which of the following mergers between two companies would be considered a vertical merger? A fabric mill merges with a pants factory, or Amazon introduces their own package delivery system, right? So think of like Porter's 5 forces analysis. One of the big threats to profitability for online retailing or like Amazon is the shipping costs and the delivery cost. And UPS and FedEx in the US market have a lot of market power. And so Amazon, when they sign contracts or work with them, they're kind of beholden to these really two strong oligopoly firms. And so one of the ways to kind of undermine or mitigate the issues from the threat of seller power for Amazon is to vertically integrate and to offer their own or to create their own delivery service. There's been talk about Amazon drones. I don't know if that's been tabled or if that's coming. I don't know. Who knows? Drone delivery seems like futuristic, like flying cars, and that since they've been talking about flying cars for a really long time and it hasn't happened, my thought is that it probably won't, and it's probably better if it doesn't. I think with any type of technology adoption, there's a big question about whether the incremental benefit over the existing system is sufficiently high. And I'm not sure that it is for those things, especially given the weights involved, but who knows? All right, so what happens to the labor market for public school teachers when a state government raises the minimum educational standards for certification as a public school teacher? So this is going to protect the labor market, right? The supply of teachers decreases and then this results in a higher wage and lower quantity of labor. So think of like a leftward shift of the labor supply curve. Leftward shift is going to lead to a higher wage and then a lower quantity. And that's going to be happening because these higher standards is going to make it more difficult. It's going to raise the costs of becoming a teacher, which means there's going to be a smaller quantity of teaching services available at all possible wages, right? That's why it's a leftward shift of the supply curve rather than like a movement along the supply curve. Basic logic behind the rational rule for sellers is that a company owner should increase output as long as the extra output adds more to revenue than it does the costs, right? So adds more, the extra output, the incremental value created, the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost. Not necessarily moving the company towards maximal total revenue. Matter of fact, like the rational rule for sellers doesn't quite get it. It has profit maximization as its outcome and as its goal. You'd get revenue maximization looking the same and giving the same outcome as profit maximization if costs were zero, marginal costs are zero. That's not totally wild. Like that can happen with information goods and stuff like that. Like you can have zero marginal costs for, well, like this video, like the marginal cost to me of having another student view the video is zero because it's completely cost. So information goods, stuff like this, it's like having zero costs isn't ridiculous. It's just that, well, that doesn't often happen. And when it doesn't happen, then you're not maximizing profits in doing so. You're maximizing total revenue, and that's not the goal. Leads to a larger gap between price and average total cost. Well, I mean, there again, what we're really interested in is the incremental marginal benefit, marginal cost, leads the company towards a minimum average total cost. Well, sometimes cost minimization is what we want to do, but we could be going in the wrong direction there. So actually, the best answer, especially relative to rational rule for sellers, kind of getting myself in trouble a little bit thinking about like the ways that you can make those happen, but this is the best answer for sure, just following from definition rational rule. And then also in all the cases where these are good for in all the cases where these give an optimal situation, this one also does. So that's why this is the best answer. Okay. So, no, the reason why this is the best answer is because it just follows by definition, but also why it's a good answer. Okay. So imperfect competition stems from the number of sellers and whether or not the product is differentiated. Yeah. Imperfect competition. So this is a situation where we don't have perfect competition. So we don't have like many buyers and many sellers, and we don't have like a perfect monopoly either, where there's no rivals. We have a situation where we have some collection of sellers, and then whether or not the product is differentiated affects whether or not we have imperfect competition. If you have identical products, then you have a different kind of form of competition. You can get something that gives us the perfect competition outcome, actually, if you have with Bertrand oligopoly, but let's not worry about that. This is actually like easy enough. I should not said too much about this, because easy enough, this kind of follows from one of the comments on the slides. Anyway, so this follows from one of the lines on the slides, and then there's also a graphic. I put it in the review, and I'll try to remember to talk about it there. All right, price competition with a product that's identical across sellers leads to an outcome of zero economic profits for sellers, right? That's kind of what I was talking about here. If we have identical products, now we've got a situation with zero economic profits for sellers. That's actually true if you have perfect competition, or if you have the Bertrand, identical products Bertrand that I kind of mentioned in passing. Identical products Bertrand is an interesting model we kind of talk about a lot more in intermediate micro. But anyway, so rational rule for sellers, or rational rule for employers, implies that they keep hiring until the wage equals the marginal revenue product of the last worker hired. So the wage is the marginal cost of hiring an additional worker. And then the marginal, it's not just the marginal revenue, it's the marginal revenue product. Remember what the marginal revenue product is? So when we hire an additional worker, the benefit that the worker is going to create is first measured in terms of what's the additional output they help us produce. But then it's not just the output, because then we're comparing like a real good to a cost, and that doesn't compare. And so what we need is the market value of that additional output that's been created. And so you hire an additional worker, the worker's contribution to the total product, the total amount that's being produced, is called the marginal product. You multiply that marginal product by the market price of those units, and that gives us the marginal revenue that's associated with hiring that additional worker, right? So it's like, what's the additional output they're creating, but what's the value that the worker has created? All right, so, and it's not marginal product equals marginal revenue, because like marginal revenue, this sort of marginal revenue for the employer is based on marginal product times price. It's the marginal revenue product. Anyway, so a natural monopoly exists when producing a large output has significantly lower marginal cost than producing a small output. So there's a little bit more to natural monopoly, but yeah, this is right. So natural monopoly is actually, it has to do with the cost structure more than anything else. You kind of see this reflected here. A natural monopoly situation involves a really large fixed cost of operating in the first place. So think of like a utility, like a nuclear reactor or a coal plant or water utility, whatever it is, hydroelectric, whatever we want to talk about. There's a really large cost of just establishing whatever is that thing. The marginal cost of selling an additional unit is pretty small, right? So the electricity or delivering water, or sometimes they argue that the U.S. Postal Service, first class letter delivery service, is a natural monopoly. What's the cost of delivering another letter once you've got the mail route and once you've got the post offices and everything? It's almost nothing, right? And it's certainly not the price that's on the stamp. The stamp is going to be basically pure revenue. The marginal cost is going to be really small. Why is this? Why is the marginal revenue? Why does the stamp have to be expensive? Well, it's because you have to recoup this really large fixed cost, the really large cost of operating. And so that's actually the problem with a natural monopoly, is because there's such a really large cost of being able to operate in the first place, and because you need to produce a really large output, or you need to produce a really large output then to be able to recoup that really large fixed cost. And then the problem with natural monopoly is that you can get a situation where if you have too much competition, now you siphon off the customer base that's necessary to be able to make it profitable. And then ultimately we assume there's something like natural selection that'll select for one firm to ultimately serve the market. That's why we get government protection in utilities, because we'd say, well, if given all the right assumptions, economic theory suggests we're going to select for one firm anyway, but let's not go through that whole bother and headache of getting there. Why don't we just protect the market so now there's just one, and then we don't have to subject ourselves to all that inefficiency. And so that's what happens with utilities. And then they say, well, because we've created this monopoly, it would have created anyway, but because we've got this monopoly that we're regulating, now we have to have government oversight of the pricing because we do have a monopoly. So anyway, that's kind of what happens with a natural monopoly. But the basic idea is, yeah, producing a large output has a significantly lower marginal cost than a small output. That's right. All right, so we have wage falling. The substitution effect causes them to substitution effect, and then the income effect causes them to. So the substitution effect is thinking about trading your time, your leisure, for work. And as labor, as the work is being more remunerative, you're more willing to sacrifice more leisure. Well, if your wage is falling, so your labor is less remunerative, you're not going to be willing to sell as much of your time to work as you would have been previously. So we're definitely expecting that will decrease the hours worked. The income effect is saying, okay, well, as the wage falls, now we're becoming relatively poorer. Oh, now we need to work more because we have to be able to make up for the fact that each hour is bringing us less income overall. And then the income effect works in reverse, where we think of like as your wage rises, this is kind of like the story from the slides, as your wage rises, you might want to work more up to a point because you're getting paid better, so you want to be able to capture that lucrative stream of wages. But then after a certain point, you'd have more money than you would need and less time in which to spend it, so you want to buy back your own time essentially. All right, so labor supply curve for social workers will shift to the right. Oh, so here we're looking at what are the shifters for a labor supply curve. Well, one of the shifters for a labor supply curve is non-wage benefits increase. So non-wage benefits, if they increase, this will lead to a shift to the right. Wages of all workers rise. No, we need to tell a story for why specifically the labor supply curve for social workers shift to the right. Matter of fact, if the wages of all workers rise, we wouldn't really expect too much of a change, because that's a little bit like the inflation story. If anything, we might have people swapping out of social work and into another, but no, because the wages of all rose. Okay. Anyway, so government increases benefits for those who are not working. Well, that would increase the labor demand, not the labor supply, because you'd need more social workers, like they'd be actually part of the benefit probably, and you need more oversight. Oh, and let's see, increases benefit for those who are not working. That would make more, so that would increase, well, maybe the better thing is that would decrease the labor supply, because you'd have maybe people would rather not work or not return to work, especially like after pandemic or something like that. Okay, so wages in other occupations rise. No, this is what I was thinking of, where people would bail and then switch into another field. Okay, so let's see. How does government regulation affect market efficiency? Well, some regulations correct for market failure. Others cause inefficient outcomes. So sometimes government influence is good on markets, particularly when the market's already or in danger of market failure. So market failure is the presence of inefficiency or the lack of efficiency. Regulations cause inefficient outcomes, like price controls, like taxes. Those sorts of things all cause inefficient outcomes. Remember, there's the trade-off between inefficiency and equality. So like in economics, like we generally assume we want to seek after efficiency, but it's not always that clear. So we always want to kind of pay attention, because we do have like compelling goals of promoting equality, and that comes at the expense of inefficiency. And that observation alone doesn't mean that it's bad to seek equality, obviously. Anyway, an employer who discriminates in hiring based on prejudice is likelier to have higher costs than necessary, because more productive workers will be foregone in order to hire less productive workers who have preferred characteristics. Worked for the city of Green Bay at Municipal Amusement Park, earning $7 an hour during the summers away from college. My friends worked for City of Green Bay Department of Public Works on the streets and trash collection branch and earned $9 per hour during the summer away from college. What's this an example of? Compensating differential. So compensating differential is the idea. It goes in both ways. It'd be like working at the amusement park was a great job. So let's say something like maybe the equilibrium wage in Green Bay at that time was like $8, just for the sake of argument. They pay me $1 less per hour because my job was pleasant, and then they pay my friends $2 or $1 per hour more than, like I said, the sort of default status quo equilibrium wage for other jobs might be $8. So they'd get a price premium of like $1 per hour or $2 per hour more than me, because their job would be distasteful. That's compensating differential. Perfectly competitive firm supply curve is its marginal cost curve above the minimum average variable cost. And that follows from the rational rule for sellers. Rational rule for sellers telling us to keep producing as long as the price is at least as big as the marginal cost. And that's going to happen above minimum average variable cost. Minimum average variable cost or marginal cost is going to cross minimum, or it's going to cost average variable cost. It's going to cost marginal cost is going to cross average variable cost and average total cost from below at their minimums. That's just by definition of marginal. When I was growing up in Green Bay, there's a sporting memorabilia store that sold sports cars. Ultimately, the store went out of business, and at the time, I thought it was unusual. Once the store announced it going out of business, it stayed open during that month. As a result of this observation, we most likely conclude the store is able to cover its variable costs, but not its fixed costs. It probably wasn't able to pay its rent. It's like right by the stadium, and so that was probably really expensive real estate. So that wasn't able to cover its rent, but it could pay for its variable costs, like keeping the lights on, paying wages for workers, so on and so forth. And so as long as it's able to cover its variable costs, it loses less than if it just shuts down for the rest of the month, conditional on assuming that it's got to pay the rent regardless. So basically, it's able to earn back at least some money that helps it cover its rent bill. All right. On Saturday night, my next door neighbor had friends over, and they stayed up till 2 a.m. sitting around a fire. As a result of the noise, I had difficulty sleeping. This is an example of negative externality. And so now, so when I wrote this question, this is before I started, before I got my treadmill, before I started running. But now, I plan on Saturday nights, like they are almost around that fire every Friday or Saturday. So I look at the weather to see if they're likely to be outside. And then I just plan my long run for those nights. And I just, as soon as they're on the fire, I just jump on the treadmill and then run for several hours and then go to bed. And so that's solved that problem. All right. According to the principle of comparative advantage, each task should be performed by the person who can perform the task at the lowest opportunity cost. Right. So comparative advantage is just saying, well, who has the lowest opportunity cost of producing whatever is this thing? And then if we want to maximize gains from trade, then we would assign those tasks to whoever has the comparative advantage in that task, and then we'd have them trade. All right, so suppose we observe an increase in wage and a decrease in employment in the automobile industry. Which of the following would explain this outcome? Recession reduces demand for new cars, and wages in the aircraft manufacturing industry decrease. So recession reducing the demand for new cars is going to cause a leftward shift of the labor demand curve. That would tend towards a decrease in wages and a decrease in unemployment. What will this do? Wages in the aircraft manufacturing industry decrease. So we're going to have more workers from aircraft manufacturing industry try to go into the auto manufacturing industry. So they'll increase the labor supply. An increase in labor supply, would also lead to a decrease in wages. So it can't be A because we need an increase in wages. Cost of capital used in production of automobiles increases and the scale effect dominates the substitution effect. Let's see, cost of capital increases. So we'll have less capital. Scale effect means like the output effect. So this is like where I think of like scale effect of capital as being like where capital is a complement to labor. And so if we use less capital and capital as a complement to labor, we should employ less labor. And so we get a leftward shift to the labor demand curve. That's a problem because we need an increase in wages. Let's see. Xbox One and PlayStation 4 or Xbox X and PlayStation 5 hit the market, cause a significant increase in the value placed on leisure among automobile manufacturing workers. So that's a leftward shift to labor supply. Yeah, that'll give us an increase in wages, decrease in employment. More than one of these could correctly explain the outcome. Nope, only D. If the percentage change in the quantity of teapots demanded is greater than the percentage change in the price of teapots, price elasticity of demand is greater than 1 in absolute value, right? So the price elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price. Okay, so if the percentage change of quantity is bigger, this tells us the numerator is larger than the denominator. That'll give us a fraction bigger than 1 in absolute value. So that's this. All right, in the market for college degrees, Michigan is thought of as a firm with some degree of market power, but it's not a monopolist. Certainly a monopolist over like Michigan degrees, because only one school can put their insignia on your diploma. But not a monopolist because there's other universities. Not a natural monopoly, not a monopsony. Monopsony is a single buyer. So, and then a firm in a perfectly competitive market. No, the market's not perfectly competitive market. Not at all. All right, so let's see. It's not a perfectly competitive. Like people, you care where you go to school. I I made really silly choices when I should have gone to, so I was from Green Bay. I should have gone to University of Wisconsin, or I should have, or whatever, if I want to stay in state or whatever. I did not do that because they were Division I for cross country and track. And I knew that I couldn't run Division I. I mean, I could have had a scholarship to Wisconsin Green Bay, but they didn't have track, so I didn't want to do that. So, and that was not like real. I shouldn't say that. I was going to say it's not like real D1, but anyway, so I ran Division III, and I picked the right team because they won nationals, but they won nationals the year after I got hurt and wasn't on the roster. So silly. All right. So when I was in middle school, parents would give me 25 cents a day to buy milk for lunch. I'd often save the 25 cents and just drink from the water fountain. I call it the bubbler because that's what we call it in Wisconsin. At the end of a given month, but I didn't want to put that in the questions. People would be really confused. At the end of a given month, I'd have $5. I'd buy graveyard slushies, which the cafeteria sold. With $5, how many slushies should I optimally purchase? Oh, this is like an application of the marginal principle, right? Rational rule for buyers: keep buying as long as the marginal benefit exceeds the marginal cost, right? All right. Carfax offers a report on used cars for $39.99. The report details ownership history, vehicle mileage, accident reports, and other information. Carfax is an example of how sellers try to lessen the lemons problem by reducing the asymmetric information, right? Don't want to increase adverse selection. That's bad. Gain profit from increasing information disparities between buyers and sellers? No, because this is restoring information. Reduce the number of cars available on the used car market? Nope. Reduce the variance in the quality of cars on the used car market? That's non-specific. Like, you can reduce the variance in the quality just by making the adverse selection problem does that. It just like makes them all bad. So, lessen the lemon problem by reducing asymmetric information. Yeah, restoring information is one of our solutions to adverse selection. Which of the following are true for a business with market power? Manager be able to choose both the price they want to charge and the quantity and sell at the selected price? No, you can't choose both. You could choose one or the other. Discount effect is always zero. No. So no, so discount effect is like we were explaining this earlier. So we're expecting you're going to have a discount effect, meaning to be able to sell additional units, you're going to have to lower the price on all previous ones. We're expecting that as a consequence of the fact that market power is interpreted as a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, so business will choose to produce more output than if the market was perfectly competitive. No, that's the problem. They produce less output. That's where the profits come from. By the law of demand, you restrict the quantity that drives up the price. So that's where the markup comes from. Business will definitely earn a positive economic profit. Nope. That's with barriers to entry, there can be profits, but lots of times you can have market power and you can have really incomplete market power. Like monopolistic competition gives us a situation with like zero profit, but still market power. Yeah, so none are correct. Which of the following is likely to be a successful entry deterrent strategy? Building excess capacity to show rivals you have the capacity to increase production to flood the market. Yeah, it's a good entry deterrent strategy. Producing one version of your product so you can focus on a single category to defend against entry. No, that's not going to be successful entry deterrence, because then it's going to be easy for a rival to come up with a different version or something that's kind of close. If you kind of cover the market, think about like the cereal aisle. Think of like all the different kind of flavors of Cheerios. And by producing so many different varieties, it's really difficult. This is like product positioning. It's called like product proliferation. And the idea is like you kind of cover all the space in the market in like this product dimension space, and makes it difficult for rivals to come in. No, so you don't want just one version. Ignore entry from weaker firms so you can save your financial war chest to engage in price wars with stronger entrants. No, actually, like responding aggressively to entry from weaker firms can generate a reputation for fighting entry, so that you actually would probably not want to ignore entry from weaker firms. Also, if enough weaker firms enter, now you've got a problem. Oppose all government regulation into your industry and market? Nope, because some of the government regulation you're actually going to be asking for, especially if it's easy for you to comply with and difficult for a newcomer to. Buyers of used cars often demand extended warranties and money-back guarantees. They do so in order to decrease adverse selection, right? decrease adverse selections. Not increase moral hazards, not decrease moral hazard. Didn't have anything to do with moral hazard because extended warranties and money-back guarantees. The idea here is to be willing to offer a warranty or a money-back guarantee. The seller presumably has a car of higher quality, right? Reduce the number of cars available. Nope. Decrease adverse selection, right? Because presumably only the sellers of good cars would be willing to accept the demand for extended warranty or money-back guarantee. Andrew and Ron own the only 2 restaurants in town. Each of them have 1 TV and are considering which NFL game to showcase on Sunday. Their options are to show Denver or Seattle. Payoff matrix. Okay, so which of the following values must X and Y be in order for this to be an anti-coordination game? All right, so we have, let's see, X and Y, 400 and 600, 600, 400, X and Y. Okay, so we have Ron choosing Broncos or Seahawks, rows, top row or bottom row. Andrew choosing Broncos or Seahawks, left or right column. And then Ron's payoffs obviously are the top one. Okay, so which is going to be, so for anti-coordination, for coordination we'd get a situation where we have like a single, we'd have two equilibria, but them coordinating on the single action is going to lead to one of those two, well, to one equilibrium or the other equilibrium. With anti-coordination, you get like what's the opposite action, right? So coordination would be they'd both do Broncos, right? And then anti-coordination is like one does Seahawks, the other does Broncos, and that's got to be more lucrative. So for that to happen, yeah, it's got to be the lower of them. So let's see, yeah, 350, 350, because when they coordinate, then they would get smaller joint payoffs than when they would fail to coordinate. And here I'm framing coordinate as do the same game. When they show different games, then they do better. That's anti-coordination. Anyway, so Seahawks. Yeah, so one time when I was living in Tucson, I wanted to go watch the Packer game, and I did not have, the game wasn't going to be on. I had to go to a restaurant place, whatever, I forget what it's called, that had, what the chain was called, that had the Packers game. And they had like, it was like Southern Arizona or like Desert Cheeseheads or something like that. So I found the place. It's like, I want to say like Famous Sam or something like that, whatever it was. There's several different locations. And I had not realized that, I looked at the map really quick on the northwest side of Tucson. I had not realized that there's 2 locations kind of in this neighborhood. And one of them was like Packer friendly, and the other one wasn't. And turned out one of them, the Packers were playing Seattle, playing the Seahawks, and one of them was like the Packer location. The other one was the Seattle Seahawks location. So I opened the door, go walking in, wearing my Packer stuff, right? Like expecting to see a lot of other, like I was really excited because here I was like in Tucson for, a long time, and I was going to go and find all the other Packer fans. So I open the door, and everyone kind of turns and looks at me and then starts booing. And I realized they were all decked out in Seattle Seahawks stuff, and I just closed the door and just walked right out. And then I realized that I'd made the mistake, and then I just went to the Packer one. And, I did not get any type of welcome or entry when I came to that. I just opened the door. I was like, completely blended in like my usual existence. But anyhow, kind of word to the wise, if you're going to go to alumni or whatever, or whatever in some other city, New York City or Los Angeles or whatever, make sure that whatever is the location is the one dedicated specifically to the group that you're affiliated with, because it might be the rival group, and you might show up and kind of be really quickly outnumbered as I was. They let me go. They didn't. I don't know what would have happened if I mean, people are pretty nice in Arizona, so I don't know. There's probably other people wired differently who might have thought, oh, this is going to be the more interesting game to go to, or more interesting venue to watch the game, but that was not what I was interested in at that time. So, or now. All right. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video and my stories as well. So